Hello everybody, and welcome to another video. But this is not going to be a simple character video, no. Today we're doing a theory crafting video. We're going to be taking a look at the increasingly likely rumor that the next WoW expansion will be what is oh so aptly named the Warlords of Draenor. I'm going to explain a little bit why the WoW fanbase believes this will be the next expansion, a certain thread on MMO Champion that may or may not be involved, what lore could be involved if this is indeed the next expansion, and why I feel like this will be an utter disaster if Blizzard is going this route, and why they should not. So, let's get started. Let's begin with the reasons why the fanbase believes this will be the next expansion. Our story begins with a little thread on MMO Champion entitled, "WoW, Want to Know What Happens Next?" I'll be explaining a bit more about said thread later on when we get into specifics, but suffice it to say, it begins by suggesting that they, the poster, have gained information from a bunch of, quote, loose-lipped employees at a Blizzard office in Versailles. Said poster then goes on to say that the upcoming expansion will indeed be called none other than the Warlords of Draenor, and they offer a few more specifics. I will link this thread down below in the comments for you to view at your own leisure. Now, this alone did not really convince many people. True, for a few pages on that thread, most people were pretty adamantly against the idea, and the name of the expansion. The now regarded as fan theory should have ended there, and it did, for a day. However, a mere one day later, on November 1st, a trademark was filed on behalf of Blizzard with none other than the name Warlords of Draenor. The trademark application, which was filed in New Zealand, had all of the appropriate descriptions that the previous expansions have had. I will also link the trademark application in the comments below so you can view that as well. Furthermore, Bubui, MMO Champion's owner, who, side note, I am going to be pronouncing his name that way because I believe it is the correct pronunciation, has personally come out and said, "I'm pretty confident about this one." This is significant due to Bubui being fairly well known for being privy to insider information, such as when MMO Champion leaked the majority of Cataclysm's information before its announcement, or the confirmation of the Mists of Pandaria expansion name. To compare, the same statement was not made about the supposed leak of, quote, The Dark Below, and in fact Bubui came out and said that it was a fake in his opinion. And now today of all days, we learn that in the United States and Europe, Warlords of Draenor has indeed been trademarked, so it appears that this will probably be the next expansion. So, in reality, we can even take the trademark filing and Bubui's supposed confirmation on their own, and even disregard the thread that I was talking about earlier if we wished. However, as I said, that thread on MMO Champion went into further specifics simply beyond naming the next expansion of the Warlords of Draenor. The thread specifically mentions that the supposed antagonist for this expansion is Grom Hellscream, and for some reason it specifically notes that somehow, for quote legal issues, Grom will be only referred to as Grommash. This thread also notes that there will be a heavy use of time travel, and other hypothetical leaks have come out saying this could perhaps be a heavy father and son dynamic of an expansion. You would have Grom and Garrosh, who is still alive by the way, and if this indeed is the next expansion, there is no way Garrosh would not be involved when his father is somehow involved. And then you have Anduin and Varian, no mystery there. You even have Wrathion and Deathwing, where perhaps the Black Prince could arrive at a hypothetical Deathwing's lair that may or may not still be canon. So, let's move into the possible storylines regarding this expansion, shall we? The first glaring issue that needs to be fixed has to deal with the possibility of time traveling. As you all may or may not be aware of, the conclusion of the Dragon Soul raid in Cataclysm, where the Aspects powered up the Dragon Soul to such an extent to kill Deathwing, caused the four Aspects to lose most of their abilities. Case in point, Kairos on the Timeless Isle flat out admits that the Bronze Dragonflight can now only catch small glimpses in time. And it is with Kairos that our first possibility of time travel emerges. Through what could be called the only storyline of Timeless Isle, we learn that the Bronze Dragonflight has a traitor in its midst. Side note, I have all 6 videos of this quest chain up and you should watch them for further information on the topic. Long story short, the quest chain ends with the implication that Kairos himself, whether in this timeline or another, is the actual traitor. Throughout the story, we had also been gathering these mysterious Epoch Stones for Kairos, which have been proven capable of powering his hourglass that can see into other times and places. Thus, it is not exactly difficult to see how Kairos, if he indeed is the traitor, could use the Epoch Stones to either activate the hourglass to time travel, or use the stones to time travel themselves. If he is indeed the traitor, he could be going back in time to somehow change the timeways to negatively affect the current time on Azeroth. It is also highly possible that this could be the beginning of the Infinite Dragonflight storyline. We've always known that the Infinite Flight happens at some point, but we don't know when or how, and this seems like the perfect opportunity to begin their storyline. On a side note, personally, I really wish this was the case, because I find the Infinite Dragonflight incredibly intriguing. If we are indeed time traveling, it would seem most prudent to begin their story now, coinciding with the traitor aspect within the Bronze Dragonflight. Next, we can examine the possibility that Wrathion himself is behind the time traveling. But Necroxis, I hear you ask. Wrathion is a black dragon. He can't time travel, you big dummy. You are correct, dear listener. However, we are forgetting one simple thing. The Epoch Stones. In the legendary quest chain, we give Wrathion the exact same amount of stones needed for Kairos to activate his hourglass one time, and we are simply told that he uses them to help augment our legendary cloak. But it is entirely possible he simply wanted them for himself, and uses the hourglass, which by now we've established can be used by a non-bronze dragon, to somehow time travel to accomplish whatever goal he set for himself that wasn't fulfilled by the ending of the Siege of Orgrimmar. Or we could just say an old god did it, like in the War of the Ancients books. That always works too. So if we indeed are time traveling like the thread claims we are, these seem like the most logical ways to do so. So how would this tie into the Warlords of Draenor? Now, we should at least explore Draenor a bit before I continue. Draenor was the name of the Orcish homeworld that the Draenei crashed upon with their ship Oshugun. The name Draenor was given to the planet by the Draenei themselves, and it means exile's refuge. The orcs themselves had no name for their homeworld other than world, so they too adopted the name. The first instance of Draenor's devolution occurred when Gul'dan, after usurping his mentor Ner'zhul and making a pact with the Burning Legion, began training orc shamans to become warlocks. These warlocks and their corrupting fel magic began turning Draenor, specifically the region that would become known as Hellfire Peninsula, into a dusty wasteland. The grass died, the water dried up, the skies darkened, and wildlife disappeared. Gul'dan himself also drastically altered Shadowmoon Valley by raising the mountain known as Hand of Gul'dan as a symbol to represent the orcs' connection with the elemental spirits, Severing. In many ways, Draenor began falling apart long before Ner'zhul had done a thing. But it isn't until after the Second War, with the Sons of Lothar barreling down upon him in Black Temple, that Ner'zhul caused the utter destruction of Draenor. The Elder Shaman sought to escape his planet, which was tainted with fel magics and swarming with his enemies, by opening portals into the Twisting Nether. And he did succeed, but at a terrible cost. Opening so many portals tore the planet apart, leaving only fragments of the world behind, floating in the Nether. It was here that Draenor would forever be renamed Outland. And of course, Outland is the name given to the current remnants of Draenor, and it is the continent that we visited in the Burning Crusade. Now, how would time travel factor into this? Well, there's really only two options, of course. We go either into the past or into the future. Let's hit what seems most unlikely first, in my opinion, the future. If we were to go into the future, there are far too many unknowns for me to adequately theorycraft what could happen. It is entirely possible that the landscape of the existing Outland that we know and love has been transformed by X number of years and given Illidan Kael'thas and Lady Vash's deaths. It would seem likely that the vast power vacuum their deaths have left, others would step up in their place. Remnants of the Illidari, which were the faction of demons that had joined Illidan because he cured their fel magic addiction, possible fel blood elves that for whatever reason remained on Outland instead of returning to Azeroth with Kael'thas' forces when he attacked Sunwell Plateau, remnants of Vash's Nagas, there's also Akama and his death tongue broken, and a slew of other non-affiliated demons and creatures. Perhaps Gruul had some unknown sons. Perhaps the Ogrila ogres began to believe, in their increased intelligence, that they should rule Outland. Truly, the possibilities are too much to say which seems most likely. What about the Naru? Would they abandon Outland for Azeroth, the planet where it has been blatantly stated that Velen is to use to get members for his Army of the Light? The Warlords of Draenor could refer to any of these groups. What seems more likely to me is if we go back into the past before Draenor became Outland. If we do, the moments of significance are several. First, we have the Orcs' genocide against the Draenei. Second, we have the forming of the Horde / the invasion of Azeroth at the onset of the First War. And third, we essentially have the Warcraft 2 expansion story, where Ner'zhul is chased by the Sons of Lothar and begins opening portals resulting in Draenor's destruction. If the portals to the past opened, it wouldn't exactly be a stretch to see factions who are interested in each of these 3 moments in time. The Draenor obviously would be incredibly interested in the time when they were slaughtered en masse by the orcs. Perhaps they would go back in the past and try to salvage more of their people. And for those of you who claim that Velen would not be in favor of this, I would agree, but let's just say not all of the Draenor are as benevolent as the Prophet. Next, there are 3 groups of orcs that would be interested in the creation of the Orcish Horde. Garrosh Hellscream, for example, I could easily see him wishing to return to the past to be reunited with his father to try and prevent him from drinking Manaroth's blood and thus cursing his family's name. Or perhaps he wants to undo his loss at the Siege of Orgrimmar and somehow tries to alter the past. Perhaps Thrall wants to see his mother and father. As for Ner'zhul, it wouldn't exactly be hard to see why some people would want to stop him from opening portals on the planet. Whether to stop the planet's destruction or prevent him from becoming the Lich King or both. The Alliance could also be interested in learning the fates of Turalyon and Illyria. Their son Eretor seems particularly likely for this last option. Now, of course, when we're dealing with wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, there's a lot of room for things to go wrong. For example, if the Draenor are not slaughtered by the orcs, it would then be logical to assume that they either beat the orcs or just avoided them. In both cases, they would never need to flee Outland and meet up and join the Alliance. The Horde itself needs to go through its natural progression in the First and Second Wars in order for Thrall to rally and free the Horde from demonic influences before the Third War. And of course, all the issues about the Horde and the Alliance needing to team up to defeat the Legion at Mount Hyjal that we've been bashed over the head with throughout these expansions. But what if I told you that we wouldn't need to go back or forth in time to return to Draenor? What if we totally ignored the time-traveling aspect of that thread? What if, like me, you find the idea that Grom Hellscream is the primary antagonist is absolutely ridiculous, but are curious about what they could still do with the planet? It is entirely possible that we will be venturing to a restored Draenor, in the exact same vein as Cataclysm significantly changed most of the old world. A possible scenario could be that now without Illidan, Kael'thas, and Lady Vashj, the Cenarian expedition, aided by the Earthen Ring, who has been urged on by Thrall, began repairing the damage that Ner'zhul's portals did to the planet. It could reintroduce several different new zones, as well as drastically change the ones that we know now. But finally, it's time for what I would consider the most likely scenario. Are you ready for me to blow your mind? Are you? Are you? What if I told you that they simply could have another continent that was blown apart from Draenor as a result of its cataclysm? Did I just blow your mind? No? Well, screw you anyway, you're not my real mom. But yes, technically, according to current lore, all we know about Draenor is that Outland is all that is left of it. But also technically, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't another continent that wasn't blown off by Draenor's destruction either. They could easily alter the lore to fit this little hole in the theory. There are a few areas of Draenor present in Warcraft 2's expansion that are not in the Burning Crusade expansion, so it is possible that these will be future zones or part of future zones. Some of these are: A. The Fields of Farallon. These were once a field of green that was home to the Laughing Skull clan. There used to be a Draenei city there, and it was the location of the Cairnva village, which actually is currently in the game right now. It is said that Draenor's destruction caused the fields to break apart, and its current remains have been transformed into the Netherstorm. However, that does not necessarily mean that other parts of the land that broke off don't still exist. B. The Broken Rock Mountains were a set of mountain ranges with large swamps in between. During the Second War, the Horde sought this area as a place to build up their fuel reserves. The Broken Rock Mountains were presumably destroyed in Draenor's destruction, but nothing has ever been confirmed regarding them either. C. The Skeletal Coast and the Devouring Sea. This area once constituted a large water body that bordered Shadowmoon Valley, and was said to have fallen into the Nether when Draenor split apart, but could also exist in some other form. And finally, D, as I mentioned earlier, we have Deathwing's Lair. Deathwing's Lair was built by the Destroyer after the Aspects drove him off following the Second War. It was east of Hellfire Peninsula and the Skeletal Coast, and during Warcraft 2 it is where Kurdran Wildhammer and his griffin Skyrie were captured, and subsequently rescued by Khadgar and Illyria Windrunner. People seem to discount this as retconned by the novel Beyond the Dark Portal, where the area is not mentioned. However, that does not mean that the area could not have simply existed in the lore after the retcon without having been the place that captured Kurdran and Skyrie were held. I believe it seems most likely we'll discover an entirely new landmass instead of a restored Draenor or time travel. Why do I believe so? Well, traveling into the future seems far too unlikely unless we're going to somehow visit an even worse destroyed Draenor in order to learn how to prevent the Legion, who had somehow returned. But that is quite a convoluted storyline in my opinion. As for going into the past, anything we do will have enormous consequences, so much so that we'd probably be actively retconning the lore as we played through the expansion. Anything we do will either prevent the Draenei from coming to Azeroth, or prevent the Horde from doing so as well. Or if we don't do anything that I mentioned earlier and went so back far into the past that things weren't really effective and mattered, what would be the point? There is no good answer here. And finally, I doubt that we would do a largely restored Draenor because of the overwhelmingly negative feedback that Cataclysm received. I strongly doubt Blizzard would ever try to attempt something that kept the basic structure of a continent, but changed the insides of a zone that Cataclysm did again. So let's run with the concept that we're not traveling in time, we're going to a new, different continent split off from Draenor when it went all exploded-y. I'm also going to ignore Grom being the antagonist, because that simply makes no sense to me, and I strongly believe that that fan theory, or quote leaked, as it were, must be tied to time travel to even remotely have a chance of being logical. So if we are returning to Outland, and from here on out I'm going to be referring to this new continent as simply Draenor to clarify, then either we will be dealing with the Legion or we won't be. For the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that we are not mainly based on the name alone. I believe if we're taking to fight to the Legion, we'll most likely be attacking Argus or any other planet besides returning to Draenor again. There isn't really a lot we can Theorycraft based simply on the name Warlords of Draenor alone, but there are a few story threads and characters that Blizzard would be extremely remiss to not include regardless of whatever story they cook up. The first is a little old dragon by the name of Wrathion. Yes, my favorite character, tied with Lore Walker Cho as I established during a 24-hour livestream. He most certainly needs to return on the next expansion after his plans fell apart at the end of the Mists of Pandaria. It would seem most prudent for someone so adamantly against the Legion to travel to a world destroyed by the Legion's machinations to try and learn something from that. It would be nice to see Wrathion travel to Deathwing's lair, which I am magically putting into Draenor and assuming it still exists. I would be intrigued to see how Wrathion would react to returning to his father's lair, and potentially seeing what gadgets and mischief the Destroyer had up his sleeve and he left there. I also have this theory crafting fantasy about Wrathion finding out that somehow there were still eggs there from when Deathwing stole a bunch, and the Black Prince becomes the new pseudo-dragon aspect by creating his own little mini dragonflight. I think that'd be really cool for Wrathion. It would make sense for him doing that after he has blatantly said the Horde and the Alliance have failed in his goal that he was trying to make them accomplish, so he's gonna make his own army. And of course, if Wrathion is out and about on Draenor, he needs to run into his brother Sibelian. For those of you who don't know, there were black dragons left on Outland under the control of Baron Sablemane, who is the human form of the black dragon Sibelian. I was talking about this with Tyrannor, another member of the Smoking Gamer crew, and he was hoping that there would be an Aldor Scryer mechanic between Sibelian and Wrathion. And I am in full support of this. There needs to be less overarching, raw or entire dragonflights slaughtering one another, and more interpersonal conflicts. By the way, for those of you saying that Wrathion would try to kill Sibelian because of the old god corruption, everything we've seen of Sibelian in the lore thus far has said that he is nowhere near as crazy or evil, he's not even evil at all, compared to the rest of his dragonflight that we see back on Azeroth. It could possibly be because he's been cut off from the old gods, or the magic of Outland's remains somehow have negated this connection, but all signs point to Sibelian being kind of an okay guy. He acts actually very similar to how Wrathion does back in Mists of Pandaria, which is to say, kind of a chaotic neutral type character. You could have Wrathion and his dragonflight versus Sibelian and his remaining black dragons, who I have no doubt Wrathion would try to incorporate into his fold. Naturally, Wrathion would see those dragons as his property, since he tends to believe everything he sees is his, something a 2-year-old very much would also do. By the way, Wrathion is 2 years old. And in the middle of it all could be the Nether Dragons, led by Neltharaku, who are unsure about how they feel themselves and how they should fit into this dynamic. I love complicated storylines, and this could potentially be a great story thread that would last the entire expansion. Essentially, the TLDR of this part of the video is that if Wrathion is not in this next expansion, I will be supremely disappointed and upset. Oh, also, if we were to get new races, I can't exactly see what they could add that would satisfy both sides. Ogres for the Horde seem kind of natural, but what would the Alliance get? High Elves? That seems a bit of a cop-out due to them looking essentially exactly the same as the Blood Elves, who are an already Horde race. I'd prefer just to have updated models across the board, instead of getting new races, honestly. Now let's begin finishing up this very long segment by examining who the Warlords of Draenor could be, shall we? I'm going to steal the idea that I mentioned earlier and incorporate it into this new version of the expansion. The Warlords will consist of different overlords from different races. Heads up, this is a highly theory-crafted part that I think would be cool. I don't necessarily know or think if it would be completely 100% canon with the rest of the lore. It's just kind of something that I would like to see and made off the top of my head. There will, of course, be a warlord who is part of the Burning Legion, but his part will be on equal footing as the rest. Remember what I said earlier, the Legion's not the sole or main focus of this expansion. And this Burning Legion overlord will be none other than Mal'Ganis himself, who is still terribly bitter about his loss at Icecrown. He fled to Outland after his defeat, and somehow made his way to Draenor and is trying to establish himself as the leader. Mal'Ganis will be fought as the final boss in the original raid tier of this expansion, where he is killed once and for all, because I'm tired of that bitch coming back to life. Next, we'll have a 10th unknown son of Gruul, leading a group of primarily ogres and Gron, who are trying to conquer Draenor with brute force, and they are going to be the group that are primarily going to clash with Sibelian and Rathion's forces, neither of which who actually are warlords, but just forces that are present in the expansion that have kind of a significant force. But not all of the warlords will be necessarily evil. The third warlord is none other than Nexus Prince Haramad himself, who is leading the Consortium. They have pushed out from Outland into Draenor, and Haramad himself has personally arrived to oversee the operation of controlling Draenor's riches for his group alone. They will clash with the Adventurer several times over a quest chain similar to the Claxi, where we eventually form a tense alliance to help him defend against the fourth warlord. Of course, it wouldn't be Draenor if there weren't Fel Orcs now, shall we? The fourth warlord will be a Fel Orc chieftain whose people were formerly Magar Orcs, that fell to corruption after they were cut off from their people at Nagrand. This will be the faction that the Horde most frequently fights against, although the Alliance can as well through the Consortium connection. The fifth warlord is none other than Maiev Shadowsong herself. After Illidan's death and her failed coup in the novel Wolfheart, she fled to Outland and discovered a portal to Draenor, where she has been forcibly subjugating the native population and swaying them to her will. She is the newest warlord, but her attempt at creating an army to then take back and defeat Malfurion and Tyrande makes her one of the most dangerous ones. This will be the faction that the Alliance fights primarily against, but the Horde will have the opportunity to fight against her while aiding in the final warlord. Maiev is not dealt with in the initial expansion launch, but she appears as the final boss in the penultimate raid patch. Warlord 6, who is the final one, will remain a mystery for most of the expansion. His agents, a contingent of Doomguards, will be frequently seen throughout the questing experience, but never fought against. They are not hostile, but most certainly not hospitable either. And they appear different than the current Doomguards we all know in the lore. More primal would be a great way of explaining how they look. They seem to be gathering intelligence to take back to their warlord, who will then try and conquer Draenor in one foul swoop to end the warring. In the penultimate raid patch, Maiev Shadowsong will make her move against this warlord, revealed none other than being Illidan Stormrage himself. His defeat and, quote, death at Black Temple dispelled the insanity that he had after his loss against Arthas, and throughout his demon side, he has managed to resurrect himself and remain undetected until now. He seeks not to subjugate Draenor out of a want to rule it, but to free it from the warring factions that are tearing it apart even further. The Alliance and Horde believe it is in their best intentions and interests to ally themselves with Illidan, but both factions will caution wariness. Illidan will serve as an advisor to the Adventurer throughout the entire expansion, first anonymously before his identity is revealed, and secondly, most personally and in your face after we find out who he is. He will be the faction that is most present during the penultimate raid, which will be the one fighting against Maiev's forces. The final raid of Warlords of Draenor will be a massive invasion led by the Legion from various portals opened on the planet itself, who seek to use the Dark Portal to attack Azeroth. This could also be a great way to incorporate Outland, as well as Draenor, into a raid patch. It will be led by Mephistroth, the most powerful Dreadlord, and the third strongest leader of the Legion itself. From one of these portals, Turalian and Illyria emerge, and return to Draenor. They lead the Alliance forces in fighting the Legion there, and they meet up with their son, as well of the Sons of Lothar, who have finally arrived on Draenor during the final patch, and they serve as the Alliance's expansion during this time. In a quest that concludes after Mephistroth's death, we find out that Turalyon and Illyria were on Argus, the world that serves as the Legion's base of operations and essentially as their homeworld. And Turalyon has managed to convince Varian Wrynn to begin preparing the Alliance to attack Argus to stop the Legion once and for all. Meanwhile, for the Horde, Garrosh Hellscream, by the way, who has been freed from his trial by none other than Wrathion himself, who is seeking to build up his own personal army, as I mentioned earlier, managed to actually have escaped the Black Prince once both of them arrived on Outland, and he made his way to Nagrand before the expansion begins. In a flashback quest chain that the Horde will get, he meets up with Great Mother Gaia, and the elderly orc verbally slaps him silly, having been told all that happened by Thrall, who was keeping in contact with his people on Outland. Because Blizzard loves their redemption stories so damn much, he will travel to Draenor during the final raid patch and be the Horde's representative, who they are forced to work with out of a lack of troops, as the Horde is still recovering from Garrosh's war. Garrosh himself admits he does not expect anyone to forgive him, but he at least can try and stop the Legion as a self-admitted penance. And of course, Garrosh will die during the raid, saving the raiders at some point and redeeming himself just as his father did, because original storylines are Blizzard's forte, yeah! In a quest after Mephistroth's death, Warchief Vol'jin informs the Horde player that he has received word from Varian Wrynn about the Alliance's intention to attack Argus, and the Horde will be following suit. Finally, to cap out this probably nonsensical fanboy wet dream, the interim patch between Warlords of Draenor and the next expansion will be one where both factions help Velen, who unsurprisingly has focused solely on finishing his Army of the Light and has abandoned factional conflicts. Anduin and Turalyon follow suit, prompting the Alliance's involvement, and for the Horde, Lady Liedrin returns and is back with the Naru of Shetrath, and both factions combine themselves into a final Army of the Light to destroy the Legion on Argus, although they still will be separate for gameplay reasons, of course. So, how was that? Did I hopefully make you want to play this expansion? Well, good. Very good. Because now I'm going to shit all over that and explain why I think the Warlords of Draenor is a terrible idea that Blizzard needs to avoid at all costs, although it seems now that they aren't and are going full steam ahead with it. To sum it up succinctly, I think going back to Outland, even in a totally new continent, or even if we include time traveling or some other nonsense storyline, is actually lazy storytelling. And we need to actually move forward with new lore, not bank on nostalgia and its previously established lore. It is of no surprise, especially if you watched any significant amount of the 24-hour livestream that the Smoking Gamer did last Friday and Saturday, that I think an Azshara expansion needs to happen next. And true, in my own theory crafting, there is pretty much no Naga or Azshara anywhere, and this is on purpose. If Warlords of Draenor is indeed the next expansion, I don't care what storyline Blizzard cooks up, there needs to be a Burning Legion connection to Argus at some point in Warlords of Draenor. There was no reason why we would have to deal with Azshara and the Naga if an Argus connection is made, and I have already established I think there needs to be one made. It would be a complete and utter break in urgency, and thus in my own theory crafting, Azshara and the Naga are completely ignored. But Azshara is an exceptionally deadly foe. Go back and check my Dark Below theory crafting video to hear more about why she is so dangerous. With the Horde and the Alliance both preoccupied with Garrosh's war, Azshara, who absolutely does need to be addressed at some point, has the perfect opportunity to strike. Even if she wasn't my favorite character in the lore, her non-appearance is a huge hole in the story. And as I mentioned, putting her in between two Legion expansions seems very lazy. Having the Warlords of Draenor, and then somehow skipping to Azshara, which I feel like they are going to do if this is the next expansion, and then going to Argus afterwards, seems very lazy and disjointed. Secondly, I strongly feel that Draenor itself won't really have anything significantly new to add to the game if we do return there. You might notice in my theory crafting section that there isn't really any new race or class added. That is because even if an entirely new continent existed, it wouldn't have radically different races, since Draenor hasn't been destroyed for that long. It's been about a total of 25 years, nowhere near long enough for entirely new species to crop and emerge. This is an extremely important point, because a major draw point of expansions is the new races, new classes, new faction, and lore that they bring. This would be the weakest one yet in that regard, and it is not something that a 9-year-old game that needs to have on its plate. I also feel like this expansion would rely very heavily on the nostalgia factor. As I said on But Wait There's Lore, it seems to me if this is indeed the next expansion, it would be the, quote, hey, remember BC was an expansion? Finally, can I just say I love the new lore in Mists of Pandaria. From the Shah to the Klaxi and even most of the Pandaren lore, I welcome new things. Old lore is great, but we've had 3 expansions of it. We know it, we've loved it, we've lived it, we've played through it, we've explored the story, we got it. I am tired of reusing scraps left over from the RTS games. And a game set on Draenor would do that. Even if we went back in time or into the future or restored Draenor or whatever, there would still be a heavily reuse of stuff and concepts and story threads that we've already experienced. Blizzard, please continue making new lore. I know Azshara isn't new herself, but she's only the impetus. You have the opportunity to create entire new spans of story with the South Seas or underwater zones, far more than you do reintroducing Draenor. But in the end, if you are going to have us go back to Draenor, please, please, please have it progressing the story. I can understand why you'd think people would want to see the past, or future, or restored Draenor, but unless you somehow spin it to create a bunch of new races, lore, classes, characters, storylines like you did in Mists of Pandaria, unfortunately I think this expansion is destined to be the weakest one. Do not bank on Burning Crusade nostalgia, please. Well, that was my video about the Warlords of Draenor, everybody. I got a little bit heated there at the end. Thank you very much for watching. If you disagree with anything I've said here or think I've got the lore incorrect somewhere, leave those in the comments below and I'll be sure to read them and probably argue with you about why I think I'm right, because it tends to be my modus operandi. Also, let me know what you think about my Warlords of Draenor theory crafting and thoughts about needing an Xara expansion before we need another Legion one. If you have anything in the lore that you'd like to see in this expansion yourself, leave those in the comments below as well. As always, if you have any suggestions for lore quest chains or characters you want to see covered, let me know and I'll do my best to deliver those. I don't have a character video this week, but I will be making one at some point. My current next longer video is actually my Necroxis rewrites Mists of Pandaria, which I am still doing and in the midst of writing the script for. Finally, if you really like this video, make sure to like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. But as per as usual, if you really want to help me out, the best way you can do that is by sharing my videos with those you think might like them. I am always looking to introduce more people to the lore, and if you do, I will be forever grateful. My name is Necroxis, and I will see you for whatever lore we choose to explore next. Because in Warcraft, there is always more lore to explore, people, especially with an expansion announcement around the corner. BlizzCon is coming up in a few days, so make sure to stay tuned to this channel and The Smoking Gamer to see all of the Warcraft lore information that you would want to know. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you next time. BlizzCon is in 4 days, folks. Farewell.